And so, welcome everybody to this afternoon's local government education program. This is the third in this year's education series, and this one is entitled Reimagining Rural Education. It's brought to you by the University of Illinois Extension and Rural Partners, the voice of rural Illinois. My name's Mike Delaney, and I'm an Extension Community and Economic Development educator. I'm based in Ogle County up here in the northern state line region. As usual, we have some quick housekeeping notes. Most of you are familiar with these. Please note that if you desire, you can activate Zoom's closed captioning function at the bottom of your screen. We will be recording today's webinar and we'll be making it available on our Community and Economic Development YouTube channel. And after the conclusion of today's presentation, registered participants will receive an email with slides and a link to the recording and some of the other materials that may be referenced in the course of the presentation. If you didn't register but would still like to receive these materials, that's totally fine. But please drop your email in the chat box so we can make sure that you will get those materials. As always, welcome at any time to share your questions in the Zoom chat space. As you may have heard in the chatter up front, we'll be having a Q&A session following the main presentation. Now I'm going to introduce Laura Hep-Kessel, who serves as a member of the board of Rural Partners. Laura?
Thanks, Mike. Welcome again to our third in a three-part series of rural education. I'm Laura Hep-Kessel. I am the Executive Director of Telehealth Services at the SIU School of Medicine. I'm also past chair of Rural Partners, which is the state's Rural Development Council. If you're not familiar with Rural Partners, we have a working volunteer board. We don't have staff, but we do what we can as a working board to connect people with resources. So we're always looking for new members and more people to get involved with Rural Partners. I will drop our website in the chat in a bit in case you want to learn more about our organization. Rural Partners is very thankful to partner with University of Illinois Extension on this webinar series. Just want to rewind for a second. Our first 2 weeks ago, we had a deputy governor and a state agency director that joined us to talk about education from a number of levels, early childhood through state board of ed level K through 12. That recording's available, and we had some really great information in case you want to go back and watch that. University of Illinois Extension has that recording available. Dave Ardrey also joined us last week. He's with the Association of Illinois Rural and Small Schools, as well as the National Rural Education Association, and he talked about rural education issues and advocacy. So those were great sessions. I would encourage you, if you didn't join us, to go back and watch those recordings, and we will get started with our third session today. So Dr. Todd Dugan, who is the superintendent of Bunker Hill, is with us today. We're so glad Todd agreed to join us, and we've had our previous two sessions, as I just mentioned, were sort of at higher levels, and Todd's going to kind of get down to the nuts and bolts of actually overseeing a rural school and sort of how they take what they have available to them and how they're creative to make things work in rural education and in rural areas. So I'm going to pass it over to Dr. Dugan and thank him for joining us. If you have questions, please put them in the chat and we'll moderate that chat after we get through his presentation. Todd, I'll hand it over to you.
Well, thank you very much for that introduction. It's my pleasure to be here today, so thank you for having me. I promise not to bore you, just about a 20-minute overview of, I think, what I had originally planned to kind of cover, and then the rest would be real informal, laid-back Q&A, is talk about some trends and on a macro level, and then talk a little bit about the positives that are associated, because there are some negative disadvantages to being rural, obviously, but there are also many, many positives. And so talk about that, a little bit about, just to focus a little bit on challenges, and then highlight some possible solutions going forward that rural schools need. So it's going to be pretty much just a conversational presentation. I do have a few slides of data to show, but I would start by just a quick introduction of where I come from. I was born and raised out in the outlying area in the country. I don't know how familiar with Illinois some of us are, but they're Atlanta, Illinois, which is south of Bloomington, north of Lincoln. There's a small town of Atlanta, Illinois, about population 1,600. I was born and raised in between Atlanta and Lawndale, which Lawndale is like a town of 100. So we had that kind of like a Lawndale phone number, but an Atlanta mailing address. So we were right on the line there. It was a we grew up very working class, very rural, and I would think that that impacted me quite a bit at an early age. And throughout my career, I've been a teacher for 9 years, a principal for 6 years, and now this is my 13th year as a superintendent. And primarily, I've worked predominantly in rural working class school districts throughout my career. So it's something very passionate and near and dear to my heart. So it's my pleasure to share a little bit about the challenges, but also highlight some of the unique positives that can only be affiliated with rural school districts. So for the first part, a little bit of trends, I'm going to share my screen for just a second. So can everybody see the screen of stats? It should be okay, perfect. Thank you. So wanted to say that, there's this misperception that rural is a large minority of the country, when in fact 53% of our school districts in the United States are technically classified as rural. 72% of our school children attend rural schools. We have nearly 8.9 million students, and for a little bit of a visualization, you take the three biggest school districts in America, New York, LA, and Chicago, and you add the next 75 largest urban districts, and that's still less than what we have student-wise attending rural schools. Now, over the years, at least over the past 50 years, there's been this plight that rural schools have been faced with, and it's known, some will call it like an economic blight, or economic recession, population decline. Some will call it the rural brain drain, where the best and brightest and most talented are drawn to larger urban areas. And while definitely some of that is true, what's often missed from the picture is that the rural population is actually quite steady. So from 1910 to 2010, according to the census, the rural population, and what you see is a very large growing urban population. And that's due to many factors, obviously immigration, but then possibly the last 50 years, socioeconomic policies that have not been kind to rural school districts or rural communities. They've been left behind, and for economic reasons have seen larger increases in urban areas. Just another visualization of the trends since from 1900 to 2015. As you can see, urban populations have been increasing at a great number, while rural has remained fairly steady. So just a minute on that. My research when I did my doctorate was on rural readiness, the challenges facing the rural working class in accessing public education. One of the things that you will encounter as you research rural education and barriers is that there are kind of two trains of thought. There's one train of thought that says, resources should flow where the people flow and migrate to. Therefore, maybe possibly rural areas, if they cannot grow, then possibly let's not invest, and then they should eventually cease to exist. There's the other train of thought that says, we know what the research says, and I will say real quick, there is a 8th grade measure across all 50 states. These are not a state assessment, it is a national assessment called NAEP, National Assessment of Educational Progress. And what they have consistently shown is that although rural areas receive far fewer financial and other resources than urban counterparts, rural students outperform academically their urban counterparts. And there's lots of different theories as to why, but the bottom line to take away from that is that the rural population that you can see over the last 100 years has remained fairly steady over time, but they also have a highly resilient population and students that tend to achieve even with less resources. So that's one of the advantages of rural education that I'm here to talk about a bit today. Let's see. And so moving on to others, we obviously have smaller class sizes. So when we look at the benefits or the advantages to attending school in a rural school, a lot of people will be quick to point out the drawbacks. For example, well, I wouldn't have access to a high school swim team or, some of the sports like tennis, lacrosse. I don't know if we have these in small towns, but there are also many positives too. We have smaller class sizes, improved academic outcomes, and we also have a higher student connection. And part of that is because in rural communities, they are more rural school districts are more community focused. In fact, I would argue that a rural school district cannot succeed without the support of a community. Real quick to share my screen again. One of the things in Bunker Hill that we are able to do is each year we kind of do measures with our students. So I think the most recent data that we were able to track from our students ourselves is you can see 100% of our kids are on track for high school graduation. 93% of our 620 students have at least one trusted adult, and 98% of our 620 students have at least one friend. Now, if any of us in the room are parents, some of us could clearly speak to that. Would this possibly outweigh the need for lacrosse or swimming? Well, that might depend on your unique family circumstances. But I will say with rural districts too, this doesn't mean we have to accept the status quo. So we can do things differently, and in fact, that's the title of today's presentation is Reimagining Rural, and it just requires some action and some vision and strategy geared towards students. Often I've been told throughout my career that we've had some very good success at Bunker Hill District 8 in my 7 years here. I can't take credit for that, but we have had much success as a school district. We're defying the local trends, and our enrollment has been growing the last 2 consecutive years, despite being in South Macoupin County, which is Macoupin County is steadily declining in population itself. So what I will often hear is, how long are you going to be in Bunker Hill before you take the next biggest job offer somewhere bigger and better? And that's inherently part of the problem, is this notion that bigger always equals better. Unfortunately, when I had decided that my passion was rural education and disrupting the inequity barriers that existed for a lot of our rural kids, I was often told that in a rural school district, leaders are either on their way up to somewhere better, or they're on their way down because they've made mistakes and they're trying to dovetail to salvage a career and end everything. So that mentality, along with the rural brain drain, could tend to present rural schools as a less desirable place to work, teach, live, grow. And I'm here today to tell you it couldn't be further from the truth. So one of the things that rural areas are more able to do is implement changes quickly. Like I will say, rural school districts can be very nimble. We can make a policy change or a practice change on the turn of a dime, so to speak, where we would not have to run through 7 labor unions, 3 committees for 3 years, and then run it up through a cabinet. We can make a change pretty quick. And some of the changes that we have made have benefited our students and that we're kind of proud of to share today, that could be replicated in other places. One of those being a barrier that we recently shattered was the access for our students that every year we do a career survey, and for the previous 5 years, the number one choice of our high school students was healthcare, medicine, nursing. So what we did with that data was we offered the CNA certification through Bunker Hill High School. And one of the things that we did was we partnered with our community. SIHF is a doctor's office in town, Lewis and Clark Community College. We all partnered together and we decided to offer this experience to our interested students free of charge, no barriers. We even transported the kids to their clinicals. Many schools will have such an opportunity, especially in larger schools. They may have multiple sections of CNA, but to do your clinicals, it's often, make your way to Alton Hospital or to a nursing home. If you can get there, great. We offered the opportunity. We weren't satisfied with that. We disrupted that inequity barriers of geography and we transported our kids. We did not want any kid, regardless of income or parents' ability to have a vehicle or access to gas cards or gas money. We did not want to let that stop a kid that wanted to explore this pathway. As a result, we graduate every year between 8 to 10 graduates that have CNA certification. They're able to often secure jobs making $20 an hour before they've even graduated high school. They graduate high school with a diploma and a certification, and most importantly, zero debt, and they are trained for the workforce in a high need area in rural Illinois. Extracurriculars. I did mention the extracurriculars because yes, it's true that some schools aren't able to offer the variety of experiences that a large urban area could. One of the things that rural schools could do if they were creative is do what Bunker Hill and our neighbor Staunton has done. Rather than co-op or consolidate everything to one school or the other, we have a joint co-op. It's a two-way co-op. So what we did was instead of everybody trying to duplicate a football program, which was struggling in many areas. I mean, Macoupin County is not alone to see the declining number of kids that want to play football. But regardless, it was a different thought. And what we decided to do was to seek a two-way partnership where one school could host one sport. And what we did with Staunton, for example, they hosted football. But what we decided to do, pick up, was another opportunity for kids. We hosted boys high school volleyball. And let me tell you, that was pretty brave to be in Southern Illinois and be a superintendent that allowed football to go to another school and add boys volleyball. However, what we've seen has been astounding. For 2 years now, we have had kids that are juniors in high school, boys that have never played a high school sport before because there wasn't a sport that they felt was for them. So that one of the other things we did is that Staunton hosts the cross country. We are the host for tennis. So how many high schools do you know in rural Illinois with about 200 kids in high school has a tennis team? Not very many. So we're trying to compete with the larger urban areas by giving those same opportunities, but we just have to think differently. And then finally, one more was esports. And if you're not familiar with esports, it's the hugest growing industry/game. I would say a kid probably has a greater chance of becoming a professional YouTube esport player, making a living off that, more likely than possibly going to Division I and making it to the professionals for athletics. But regardless, we offer esports, and it was just a reflection of offering kids what they wanted to do, and it's a way to increase opportunities. So it's one way schools can get creative. I mean, it's one of the things I've said throughout my whole career is that those with less resources are forced to innovate more. And I've learned that lesson, even as a child. I remember I grew up out in the country and we were poor by any stretch. I would say not middle class whatsoever, working class on the cusp of poverty. But there were many times when, out in the country, you have out in the country, you don't have the same rules that apply. For example, in the winter, when Ameren wants to shut off electricity for an unpaid power bill, they cannot shut the heat off in a municipality during the winter. However, in an outlying area, oftentimes homes are heated with propane tanks from a third-party reseller. Those rules don't apply. So as a child, I remember our house being depleted from propane. And I remember my dad buying a 20-gallon propane tank for a gas grill and hooking up like 10 different measures of pipe fittings just so my sister and I could take a shower and have hot water. So again, that's the lesson, is that those with less innovate more. Moving on to some more challenges. One of the challenges that we all face in rural areas is limited funding. I'll share my screen just briefly. Like many rural communities, we are faced with a long abandoned school that was closed due to declining enrollment, declining revenue over a decade ago. In fact, I inherited this building when I started here, and it's still my number one priority is getting this thing resolved. But anyway, this is also, it's a testament to how rural schools need resources and often lacked resources. For example, every November there's a school board member conference in Chicago in November. And I remember a couple years ago there was a breakout session about a school district that had an abandoned school and they refurbished it. And I was like, okay, this sounds like a great session to go to. I'm going to learn some tricks. Well, it wasn't really a trick. They basically said they had 32 million in the ed fund that they spent and fixed it up. So not too much of a trick. It was more like, okay, you had a lot of money and resources. That's why you did it. So anyway, this was just one example too of how limited resources impact rural schools. But again, this doesn't have to be a negative because like I said, the lesson is with less resources requires more innovation. This slide right here just shows the how we've overcome geographic isolation. These were our students that were attending the CNA certification on the campus of Lewis and Clark. We didn't leave anything to chance. We actually made sure every kid had complete unfettered access. So a little bit more about some innovative solutions and unique things that Bunker Hill has faced and experienced is number one, if you look number one on the list is called the Power of 15 pilot program. This is Bunker Hill High School's first year of piloting this program. But basically what we did is I went to the board last year, presented them with a multitude of research that shows what the power of 15 credit hours can do. So regardless if a child goes on to higher education or they go straight into the workforce or they go into the military to enlist, the research consistently shows those kids with 15 credit hours under their belt are far more resilient and in the workplace and in their career than those without it. So we started looking at a pilot program and we thought, well, let's do this for all of our kids. So we now have partnered with Lewis and Clark, where every child that's a junior and senior, I mean, there's a few criteria they have to meet, but they're not super stringent. Like I think our GPA is 2.7 minimum. So this is not something that we're only going to limit to, the best of the best and the brightest. This is something that could change a trajectory for a kid's life. So we actually, as a school district, we will pay the tuition for up to 15 credit hours for a kid's junior and senior year. And there's a caveat, if they fail the class, they have to pay us back, and then it's up to us to collect it. But our goal is to give as many kids as possible access to 15 free credit hours. So I know one kid recently, as a senior, he just told me that this year he took advantage of our Power of 15 and was doing some dual credit classes before. So thanks to this, he is graduating high school in May with a diploma, and he's also having 33 credit hours. So think about that. That's half of an associate's degree, debt-free. So those are some of the things that we're trying to do to eliminate some of the disadvantages of being in a remote rural school. Another one is most rural communities too, if they're anything like Bunker Hill, love traditions, right? I will say this, in a small high school, you don't touch a high school mascot. Like that's a death sentence for any superintendent. You do not change traditions. But one tradition I feel that is something to be honored is in a small rural community is the hard work ethic. That's something that everybody can agree on is needed with our graduates. So we actually developed a seal of work ethic, and it has its own criteria. A kid has to be a certain amount of attendance, below a certain amount of disciplinary infractions, like suspendable disciplinary infractions. They have to take one CTE course or dual credit. They have to have so many volunteer hours, and it's this checklist and this criteria. And if a kid meets all of this when they're a senior, they get a diploma, which is their high school diploma, but they also get this little sticker that costs about 35 cents a piece. But it's a sticker that goes on their diploma that says this child has demonstrated they have work ethic. That is something our employers in our community have desperately been telling us for years that they want, the soft skills. Kids learn that in our CNA program. The first year we did it, I almost had a mutiny with the kids because they were livid that they had to attend clinicals at the hospital on Columbus Day. They just could not believe that anybody would ever have to get out of bed before noon on Columbus Day. Well, this was a soft skill that our kids learned quickly, that you have to be there. You have to be there on time. You have to show up. And so, I don't know, we're kind of proud of that. So that's one thing. Unique about our seal of work ethic, though, is that we have partnered with area employers. Morton Buildings out of Litchfield, Jardin Farms in Bunker Hill, West Star Aviation. A lot of these employers have signed an MOU with the school district that said if a kid graduates from Bunker Hill High School and they have that seal of work ethic on their diploma, they will agree to grant them an opening or an interview for an opening that they may have. Probably 10 years ago, might have been a little bit more because I think everybody now is hiring and interviewing like crazy with open interviews. However, it is one more example of doing things a little bit differently in a rural area. And finally, one I'm most excited about, it's in the works right now. We're looking at our preschool through 20 program. So we're trying to, obviously in a rural area, and I showed you that one slide. I showed you the slide with the building that was dilapidated, right? Well, because of financial necessities back in the day, that building was closed and kids were kind of moved into another school. So we have an overcrowding problem with our growing enrollment in Bunker Hill. So we have a space problem. We have one of the most robust, one of only 2 inclusive preschools in Macoupin County. But what we'd love to do, expand that to birth to 3. We have no space. So we have written grants to the Illinois Capital Development Board. There was a preschool early childhood construction grant a few years ago. We submitted for. Round 2 was supposed to happen after round 1, never did happen. But anyway, we have that option out there. So we're trying to, first of all, expand the birth to 3 for Bunker Hill students. That we need space. The other piece is after high school. Instead of sending a kid on the stage and saying, well, good luck, go to college, go find yourself, don't rack up too much debt and also have fun. We're taking it a step further. We're actually, we have a phone call in 2 weeks with a national funder to possibly fund an experimental grade 13 at Bunker Hill High School. So we would be, as far as my opinion, I think we'd be one of the only high schools in the state to have an experimental grade 13. And what we envision is, one other thing unique to rural areas is that there's no shortage of businesses that struggle to make it. So you can look in any small town and see a lot of empty storefronts that used to be businesses back in the day when rural communities were more thriving. Recently, we had a Subway, the sandwich shop, close. So we're looking at that spot, and what we envision is having a full-time staffer paid for through grant funds that would be staffing this building open to the community and would be checking on our kids that go to college once they graduate, checking on their grades, checking on their attendance, checking on kids even the year after high school in the workforce, making sure like, hey, how's the job going? Do you still like it? If you don't like it, here's what you could do. You could go to Lewis and Clark and get this certification, and this career would be an option for you. So we're going to try to work on a grade 13. And the reason for that too, as I was going to say, it requires thinking differently. So one more slide. That's my last slide to show. Kind of want to let this sink in. One of my favorite slides I've ever seen. That in 1900, we set school up and the expectation was to finish 3rd grade. 21 years later, we're already like, okay, kids need more education to be successful. Bumped it up to 6th grade. Only 15 years after that, we said we need 2 more years. 10 years after that, we bumped it up to 11th grade. And then finally, 1947, we bumped it up to 12th grade. And guess what? It has been since 1947, we have stayed in this K-12 model. So what does it mean to go to like I said, from a birth to grade 13? We're hoping to, again, this is kind of the exciting news, so stay tuned for this. This is what we mean when we say passionately that, these rural communities, they do have their disadvantages and they have their equity challenges. However, rural does matter. And so that's why we intend that rural, when we talk about like the rural brain drain or should these communities cease to exist, at least some of us are down in the trenches saying that, yes, these areas should exist, especially since, COVID-19 with the work remote or hybrid schedules and all that. Rural areas could be a great place to settle down, spread out. And raise a family. But I would argue even that should they cease to exist? Absolutely not. And I think our chances to turn this around. And how do we do that? We're trying to prepare kids very well to do college, workforce, or military, whichever they prefer. And in the hopes that we've prepared them enough to where you could succeed in any environment, including staying at Bunker Hill, raising a family, being productive, and joining the community. And it's a true wraparound. So that's why we say with this Birth to 20 initiative, that's what we mean when we say we're trying to reimagine rural education.
Thanks,
Okay.
Todd. That was great information, and you guys are doing some really great things at Bunker Hill. They are lucky to have you there. Did one of the questions?
I don't know
Sorry,
about that, Laura. I called a snow day last week and they didn't like that. So
get the pitchforks out.
yeah, yeah.
Can't win, I feel like, on those. I'm glad that our district called a snow day when it was like -9 outside. No kids need to be waiting for a school bus and stuff. And that
Ours was -22, and you're right. There are some very good families that I trust completely to dress their kids up, but there are about half that would, my own daughter, she's a freshman. She wore a hoodie and no coat that day.
Yeah, it's a fight every morning at my house to get my boys to wear coats.
Yeah.
Todd, I was with you that day too. I also called school off, and I hate doing that. But boy, up here was -25. So it was, like you said, too many walkers, too many controllables. Do its
Yeah.
best.
I see a question in the chat. Is there an enrollment number? No, that is crazy. Supposedly ISB has this, they hired this lady, Darcy, I can't remember Holloway, I think is her name. She is now like a rural district support person. I know that's one of the things she's passionate about coming up with a common definition. There are definitions from the Census Bureau because that was one of the first steps in my dissertation was to define rural. And I had no luck. I had no luck defining rural because the Census Bureau describes it one way. The National Center for Education Statistics defines it another way. Some of them say if the county has 40,000 or less, that everybody in that county is rural. Well, Macoupin County, I don't care what you say, it's rural, but there's 44,000. So by that definition, we would not be considered rural. So no, there is no consensus. I've been able to identify a very scientific way to identify rural, though. Do you have to go to Dollar General or Casey's once a week? Do you leave your door unlocked? When people ask you like what town you're next, do you like mumble your town and then say it's 45 minutes from St. Louis? Those are the things to me. I think those are the more accurate scientific definitions of rural. But that's a great question because Illinois included does not. Georgia actually is kind of ahead of us on that. They actually have an office with their Georgia Department of Education. They have an office of rural education innovation. And they were able to give all kinds of grants, helps, networking, support, and assistance to rural schools in Georgia because let's face it, there may be grants out there like U.S. Department of Ag, U.S. Department, USDA has grants. There's a CF grant, Community Facilities Grant, but in a rural school district where I'm the superintendent, also, transportation director, budget, special ed coordinator. We kind of do it all. Some of those long, cumbersome, very detailed grants, we don't have the bandwidth, and I'm not talking internet bandwidth. I'm talking personnel bandwidth to do that. So Georgia actually has a great model down there where they're able to plug people in to help rural schools that lack staff get up to par and provide, like there's one from the U.S. Department of Ed, community schools. We would love to do that, and wraparound service in Bunker Hill would be huge. We don't have the staff to apply, manage, or even complete the every 90-day very voluminous reports required. So
I think that's a good point, Todd. I serve on a rural county board and it's the same thing. There might be funding available, but if you don't have the resources to apply, implement, report, all of those things, it might as well not be available because we can't apply for it.
yes,
Mm-hmm.
there have been grants where you'll hear about a neighboring like I won't mention the district, but there was a district that got a grant that we applied for. We did not get it. And literally it was me and our maintenance guy writing the grant, and they just paid somebody. They just paid somebody, a company, to do the grant for them because they have resources.
Mm-hmm. There's another question about dual credit programs at community colleges making great strides. The employment problems are often impacted by lack of childcare. Have you heard of other partnerships to find space or staff for childcare? The grant seems to go to the Chicago area.
Right. Well, that was the grant I was talking about with the early childhood construction grant. Round one was going to be announced. We submitted a I will say this, the best grant I ever wrote was to take that abandoned school, demolish it, and then build basically a preschool early childhood center. So it had birthed the three sections in it. It had we had a space for classes for new mothers, breastfeeding machines, areas. We had this whole design. We had early childhood, pre-K classrooms. In the middle, we had a high school class that we had a teacher with a master's that was going to teach a class called Introduction to Early Childhood. We were going to have high school kids in the classroom connected to these preschool classrooms. And I just saw that in the chat. Sorry, I get distracted. So we had this high school classroom in the middle, and then the two preschool classrooms, and this would have been open to any student in Macoupin and Montgomery County. They would have gotten an elective class taught by our teacher, Introduction to Early Child Care, and they would have had the chance to work as parapros in the classroom with kids. So A, would have been providing child care for our employees. B, would have given kids hands-on experience to say, I love it or I hate it. Because sometimes I feel strongly that sometimes just learning that you hate something is a very good lesson to learn. My mother-in-law went to Eastern, got her degree to be a teacher. Thought she loved it until she did the student teaching, and then those kids like tore into her. I love my mother-in-law dearly, but she wears like Easy Spirits and polyester pants. Those kids probably had a field day with her. And you know how kids are. So she decided like, hey, I don't want to teach. I can't stand it. But she spent all that money in 4 years on a degree that she never used. Sometimes if we can tell a kid right away, if a kid that needs to be taken to the bathroom or help with that, if that's not your thing, fine. What have you wasted by doing this? You've wasted nothing but an elective in high school.
Mm-hmm.
And we've all taken wasted electives. I remember taking a class where I think my final project was I made my mom an ashtray. And this was in the late 80s, early 90s, where it was actually, I remember the art teacher was like, is that appropriate? I was like, you don't know my mom. She's going to love it. But yeah, so no, that is an issue though. And somebody put that ProPublica report about the impossible task of preschool or childcare, 100%. 100%. We are in a preschool desert, literally, according to the state. And that construction grant that we had applied for would have, because I feel like you could throw a ton of money from the state level into early childhood. Here's more money, but there's no early childhood teachers. So at some point, what are you doing? We got money, but there's no teachers out there. So we were hoping to actually address the pipeline with a model that could have been duplicated anywhere across the state. But the frustrating part was those round one grants went, Bolingbrook, I'm not picking on the towns, but Bolingbrook, Romeoville, Schaumburg, and I think there was one in Peoria. And then it was round two will start in May. And that was obviously 2 years ago. Round two never materialized. So that is the rural story in a nutshell.
But what do you think has happened with when I was in high school, I did the now I can't remember what it's called, but where I spent a half day my senior year working and a half day in the classroom or at school. It seems like you don't see that as much anymore. And that's to your point, that's a good opportunity for for students to be exposed to stuff to see if they like it or get experience or whatever. Why do you think that's gone away, or why is it not as prominent as it used to be?
I think it really took a hit during like the years where everybody was trying to send everybody to college, which was, at the time, when they passed the law, I think everybody in education was like, hey, you guys didn't think this through, but nobody ever consults when they do that. That was like a federal law. So anyway, I think that was probably where it declined a little bit. We do have the work co-op program here, but what we try to do differently, we still have a couple of kids. Like, yes, you might have a kid work at we think you got one kid that does the work co-op program at works at Burger King in Wood River. Okay, fine. We try to make them more like apprenticeships. Like we have a Westar Aviation has a kid there that does the work co-op program. Payne Construction Service out of Bunker Hill. They build houses and construction projects. They have two kids on the work co-op program. But we'd prefer to call it as like work-based learning or an apprenticeship instead of just the work co-op.
Yeah.
Now there are still, because I feel like working a half day at the grocery store and half day at school, that was probably a lifesaver back in the day too. I'm sure there's from what I know of our families too, we have quite a few kids that could probably use the money to help
Their family.
boost their family's income. Yeah. But no, I think those things are valuable too. And like I said, no matter your academic inclinations, whether you want college or not, there is nothing wrong with an HVAC internship. Nothing. In fact, if our high school maintenance guy, he was going to work on his HVAC certification. Once he did that, I was all set to have some high school kids work with him. And then, get their HVAC experience there. But yeah, they're still around. I just think, like I said, I think there's still a time and a place for the traditional work co-op, but I think by setting our sights higher, on an apprenticeship where you could also get paid. We have another one with Hawthorne Animal Hospital in Edwardsville, right? That's a work-based learning opportunity. And if those kids stick it out there, Hawthorne will hire them and pay for their schooling after they're hired. So
it's great.
We're looking for those opportunities as well as, and like I said, not dissing on the original model, but we're trying to make them a little bit more impactful.
Yes. Nancy likes the idea so that kids can help fix things at home.
Yes.
I think we mentioned Carolyn included a couple of great resources there, articles that in case anyone's interested, you might want to click on those before the webinar's over so you don't lose those links. She mentioned that the embedded programs require philanthropic support, so something to keep in mind. Todd, I'm gonna throw one at you. If resources weren't an issue, what's one thing you'd implement tomorrow if you could?
If what was not an issue?
If resources weren't an issue.
What was one thing I would implement tomorrow? Resources weren't an issue. I would implement our, we're trying to call it a bunch of things, but I think in a community like this, you've got to have it from cradle to college career, so I would do the whole early childhood, birth to 5, birth to 3, also educating, replenishing our pipeline on teachers, but then on the opposite end too, that grade 13, I tell you what I envision this could be is like, you picture the subway on Route 159, being like a check-in station, kind of like dress it up like a coffee shop or some kind of a Wi-Fi hotspot. And you got a person in there, and we're going to call her a post-secondary coach, just like a friendly face that's going to bug you to get your work done. Even, because a lot of times first generation college is tough. I was first generation college. I didn't even know what a bachelor's degree was. I didn't understand like some of the classes. I didn't understand what it was all about. So I think that's a huge thing for our kids. And we've expanded our AP dual credit here at the school quite a bit because we try to tell kids like, hey, if you did that fine, you can do college if you choose. Now, granted, college isn't for 100% of the kids, but it's for 100% of the kids that want college. Absolutely. If that's what you want, we will get you ready for it. So I think if I could have that funding, like I would have that little shop, I would have like a PFOP thing where we give our graduating seniors the year after high school, they would have a key fob. They could go in there, access the internet. They could talk to this, staffed person. I need help. Can you look over my resume? I dropped out of college and I want to get a job. How do I get workforce development? That is, and I just think like what a difference that could make.
Mhm.
Now, when people, I tell that people here, like I've offered to partner with Staunton and Southwestern, some other districts, like, hey, we could do this 3 ways and have a lot more kids. They're like, why? Why? And I was like, okay, well, they're looking at like, you don't get extra funding for grade 13. That's not why I'm doing it. I want to do it because I want to change trajectories of lives because that makes your town a better place.
Mhm. Yeah, and those first
It's,
generation college students might feel better if they knew they had a resource that was going to kind of push them or help them
yeah.
that first year. Yep.
And you can't tell me in some of these other districts too, like that's not an advantage that people would possibly, like, hey, I would move to a small town for that because I'm basically guaranteed that my kid is going to graduate with at least a diploma, work ethic, certification,
Mhm.
do the co-op sports, and also a year after there's going to be follow-up and checking in.
We may have answered this earlier, Todd. I'm not sure, but does broadband access impact esports teams in rural Illinois? Is there advocacy needed there?
Not in our town. We have a very good relationship with Madison out of Staunton, but also know that due to the Department of Innovation and Technology do it, they're building us a completely private network too, so our bandwidth should be fine. In fact, that's one of the sports we love because we're so short on bus drivers. They have their meets virtually. It's like, yes, I don't have to worry about a bus driver.
I know that that's all the rage, but and as a telehealth director, I should like be like, yes, but I still have a hard time wrapping my head around that.
Yeah.
Trying to understand how that works.
Yeah, I know. And all the fun games, they're not allowed, like Call of Duty. They say they're too violent or whatever. It's like, I don't know.
Yeah. Carolyn mentioned that policy debate's another way to do something remote.
Yeah.
Well, we've had a lot of great comments, great discussion. If anyone has any last questions or comments that you want to make right now before we wrap up, please jump in. You can unmute yourself or you can add something in the chat box before we finish. Just as a reminder, our first two in this education series, our webinars are available. Those recordings are available on Extension's website. Please check those out if you missed those. There's a poll that Nancy just probably just came up on your screen. Please answer that. Just trying to gather if some of the topics that we're covering are topics where you're increasing your knowledge. If you have suggestions of other topics we should cover in future webinars, you're welcome to throw those in the chat as well. We really appreciate everyone's time. We know a lot of people will be jumping off to get to their afternoon meetings, but Todd, thanks so much for spending the lunch hour with us and taking the time and sharing with us the great things you are doing. Thanks to all of our attendees who have joined us. Some of you I know have been with us for all 3 sessions. We hope you'll keep an eye on our future webinars and join us when you find a topic that is relevant. And think we can kind of wrap up there. Any final comments or questions? All right. Thank you so much. I hope everyone has a great afternoon and try to stay warm.
Thank you.